welcome back to another video. This video is a hair tutorial, I guess you can call it. I'm just gonna be showing y'all how I made and installed this wig. It's gonna be very detailed. I'm gonna try to give y'all as much information as possible on how I created this wig. That way there's no room for like error, or like if there are any questions, it'll be something like very, very specific. I'm gonna try to think of all the questions that I have when I watch like wig construction and install videos, because I feel like sometimes, or a lot of the times when I watch those types of videos, I'm always left with, but how did they do this or how did they do that? Because somebody like just kind of skimmed over it really fast. Yeah, I'm usually just left with a lot of questions. This is only my second time ever making a closure wig, and I feel like this wig turned out pretty good. So yeah, this is just gonna be a very detailed video on how I made and installed this closure wig. And if you ask me, like, I high-key got this thing looking like a frontal, if I do say so myself. And best part about it is glueless. So it's like, bro, you can't get any better than that, really. Yeah, that's enough of me talking. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So y'all, I started recording a little bit later than what I wanted to. I wanted to record myself like starting sewing the closure on, but then I forgot. But anyway, this is me sewing the closure on, and what I will say is that I will make a separate video on like how I bleached the knots and stuff, because I didn't really know what I was doing, and then I had over bleached the knots, and then the roots got bleached, and then I had to re-dye the roots, and it was all that. But I finally fixed it. But I'll make a separate video for that, and then plug in the closure as well. The wig head, you want to make sure you use a canvas wig head, because the styrofoam ones just are way too small and they're not like practical at all. And then you want to make sure that the wig cap is positioned properly on the wig head, because if it's pulled too far down on the wig head, it'll be too big. If it's not pulled down far enough, it'll be too small. And then you want to make sure the closure is flat when you're sewing it on. And when I say flat, I mean don't align the closure from the front of it. You want to make sure that the back of the closure is flat on the wig cap, so that way when you cut the cap out from up under it, it'll still like, it'll be more mobile, and it'll fit more tightly to your head when you put the wig on. And then when you're sewing the closure on, when you get to the part where the elastic band is, you want to sew through the mesh cap and through the elastic band to anchor the elastic band in place. But when you start sewing the wefts on, and I'll go more into detail on that later on, but when you start sewing the wefts on, you don't want to sew through the elastic band, because then your wig will not stretch when you try to put it on. And I had made a wig several years ago, and this is a mistake that I made, and when I got done, I could not put that wig on because it would not stretch, and I was upset. But as far as like my sewing technique and stuff like that, I'm gonna show a close-up of that later on, of how I like actually sew and tie. But you can see I'm just kind of looping the thread over the needle before I pull it all the way through. But like I said, I'm gonna go into more detail on that later on. So I'll let y'all watch me sew the rest of this closure on. And then right here, you see me about to tie off this thread. And like I said, I'm going to go into more detail on it. But right here, you can see that I just, instead of pulling the needle all the way through, I leave the loop. And then I just use the loop as the other side of the tie, and just literally like tie 3 or 4 knots, depending on how secure I want it to be.
Hold up, you ain't never gotta say shit, and I know you taste this a little bit, high maintenance, everybody else basic, you live life on an everyday basis with poetic justice,
I got back on here to tell y'all I sewed the elastic band down on both sides up here. Now I'm about to just sew the wefts on. So what I'm gonna start, I left these 3 T-pins and then the one in the front. I left those 3 in just to anchor the front part down. So I'm gonna double weft it. So I'm not gonna just sew on single tracks, I'll sew on double tracks. But I'm gonna start down here and then just like kind of sew all the way across. And then like y'all will see the pattern that I'm sewing in, but just remember, like whenever you go to do this yourself, you don't want to sew, like you can kind of see the difference between the net and the elastic band. So like y'all can kind of see like right here, you see the net just by itself, and then like right here is kind of where the elastic band starts. You can kind of see the difference, but just remember when you sew the wefts down, don't sew the elastic band, just sew on the net part and not the elastic band part. Okay, so y'all heard me explain, you know, how I do that, and this is the hair that I use. But yeah, I just wanted to give y'all a little bit more detail about how I sew the wefts on. So what I was saying is that like when you're sewing the wefts on, you want to be careful about sewing through the elastic band. Try your best to just sew through the mesh part of the cap when you get to the elastic band as far as like sewing your wefts on, because like I said, if you sew, and like you can see I'm sewing the track along the elastic band, and so if I were to sew that track through the elastic band all the way around, then the wig just will not stretch when I go to put it on. And so just make sure like when you get to the elastic band, when you're sewing the wefts on, just sew through the mesh part and not through the actual elastic band. But to anchor the wefts down, y'all saw me just put some T-pins in. I'm just using those to just keep the wefts in place while I sew, and so that way I can use both of my hands. And I'm starting off with double wefts for, you know, to make the wig more full, more dense. And then I'm using these 22, 24, and 26 inch bundles by True Bundles. It's like neat Brazilian unprocessed hair. It's grade 7A hair, so it's not the best quality hair, but I mean, that's still okay.
I mean, I write poems in these songs dedicated to the fun sex, your natural hair, your soft skin, and your big ass and that sundress. Good God, what you doing that walk for? When I see that they move, I just wish we would fight less and we would talk more. They say communication, say relations, I can tell, but I can never write my wrongs.
So when we talk about tying the wefts, like if I run out of thread or anything like that, or if the only time I tie the thread is if I run out of thread or if I'm starting a new row. And so I'll either do like the tie technique y'all saw me do before, or I will do, so I'm just showing the tying technique again. So I'm literally just not pulling it all the way through and using that loop as the other, you know, half of the tie, and just tying like 2 or 3 knots. So now you see me just folding the tracks over, and so instead of like cutting the wefts and then starting a new row, I just fold over, and that saves time and energy. But it also, like, if you want to for some reason take the wig apart and use the wefts for like a sew-in or something, you will be able to, because the tracks will still be intact for the most part. And then when I get up to the top of the wig is when I'll actually start cutting the wefts. But, you know, we'll talk about that later. And then as far as that wraparound technique is concerned, when I go to do that, I literally, and this is like a surgical kind of suture technique that I'll be using, but instead of like tying it off, what you can do is just wrap the thread around the needle and then pull the thread through that wrapped part, I guess, if that makes sense. And I'll show a close-up of it somewhere at some point. But that's another way that you can you know, close off the thread or tie off the thread if you don't want to. Because I know the other way with like using the loop as one of the tying parts, those knots can be kind of thick. But if you use the thread to wrap around the needle to tie it off, that's not as thick of a knot, but it's still pretty secure. So it really just depends on what you want to do. Sometimes I tie it off with the two ends. Sometimes I just do a wraparound technique. It really just depends on what you want to do.
I'm young and rich and plus I'm bougie. I'm not stupid, so I keep the Uzi. Records on records, got records on records, so my money making my bank. Ay. You niggas got a low act rate. We from the north, yeah, that way. That could be blunt in the ashtray. Bitches just national smash day.
This is the wraparound technique I was showing you. So see how I'm wrapping the thread around the needle and then pulling the needle through that wrap portion, just pulling it all the way down, and that creates a pretty secure knot. And so if you want to do it like that, it does save a little bit of time, but I don't think this knot is as secure as the other way of tying it, but you know, it's still pretty secure. The wraparound technique I usually use for just like folding over the wefts, but if I'm like running out of thread, then I'll usually use the other method.
Wife, and we know she slut me. Broke a brick down, nut it, butt it, nut it, nigga, duck it. Don't move too fast, I might shoot you. Draco, bad bougie.
So this is a close-up of my sewing technique, what I was talking about earlier. So to actually sew, I'll put the needle, I put it actually through the wefts, but you can pull the needle under the weft if you want to. But I pull the needle through the weft, and then I loop, I loop the thread over the needle and pull the thread through that stitch. And that just helps make it more secure instead of just doing like, you know, a running stitch. You pull the needle like through the stitch, it just helps it to be more secure.
Everybody else basic, you live life on an everyday basis with poetic justice. Poetic justice. If I told you that a flower bloomed in a dark room, would you trust it? I mean, I write poems in these songs dedicated to you when you're in the mood for empathy. It's blood in my pen. Better yet, with your friends and them. I really wanna know you. Hold up, I really wanna show you off. Fuck God, pour up plenty of champagne. Cold nights when you curse this name. You called up your girlfriends and y'all curled in that little bitty range. I heard that she wanna go and party. She wanna go and party. Nigga don't approach her with that Atari.
Okay, so when I'm starting a new row and I'm folding it over, sometimes when you fold the weft over, that can kind of pull the cap out of place. And so I just put like a T-pin in the cap, and you can kind of see it right there, but I just put a T-pin in the cap to kind of hold it in place while I fold the weft over. And then what I also want to say is that whenever I start a new row, like when I fold over, if I don't have, like I'm not going to cut the thread every time I start a new row. Like I'll just kind of leave the thread where it's at. The only time I will cut the thread is if I'm running out of thread. That's the only time I cut it.
Put you on game, put you on a plane, take you and your mama to the motherland. I could do it, maybe one day. When you figure out you're gonna need someone. When you figure out it's all right here in the city and you don't run from where we come from. That sound like poetic justice. Poetic justice. You were so new to this life, but goddamn, you got adjusted. I mean, I write poems in these songs dedicated to the fun sex, your natural hair, your soft skin, and your big ass and that sundress. Ooh, good God, what you doing that walk for? When I see that thing move, I just wish we would fight less and we would talk more. They say communication save relations, I can tell, but I can never right my wrongs unless I write them down for real.
Say if you a bad bitch, put your hands up high, hands up high, hands up high. Tell them dim the lights down right now. Put me in the mood. I'm talking about dark room.
And up here, I kind of started sewing like under the weft, just because like trying to push the needle through the actual weft is kind of difficult. and it kind of started to hurt my fingers a little bit, so I just started getting a little lazy and going like under the weft. So I mean, that's also an acceptable way to do it. It really don't matter. It just depends on what you want to do and how secure you want it to be. Either way is secure in my opinion though. And like right here, you see me brushing out the hair, and I just like to brush out the hair to keep the hair detangled, and it makes the hair a little bit easier to work with when it's not tangled. So I just like to brush through it every so often.
You know, young rich niggas. You know, so we ain't really never had no old money. We got a whole lot of new money though. Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking, the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Cooking up dope in the crock pot. We came from nothing to something, nigga. I don't trust nobody, grip the trigger. Nobody call up the gang and they come and get changed. Call me a river, give you a tissue. Bad and bullshit. Cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas are savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too. My bitch is bad and bullshit. Cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas are savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too. All set. Records on records, got backers on backers, I'm running around.
So once you get about this far up on your wig, you want to go ahead and close or tie off that stitch. And then you also want to cut the weft here, because at this point is when we're going to start using single wefts instead of double wefts. And so the reason that I'm using the single weft is so that the wig can lay flat at the top, because if you use double wefts all the way up the wig, it's going to be mad bulky at the top of the wig. The closure isn't going to be able to cover all the tracks because it's going to be too bulky. And so when you get to about right here at this point of the wig, you want to start using single wefts instead of doubling the wefts up.
You niggas got a low act rate. We from the north, yeah, that way. That cookie blunt in the ashtray. Bitches just national smash day. Hop in the limb, have a drag race. I let them birds take a bath, babe. Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking, the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Cooking up dope in the crock pot. We came from nothing to something, nigga. I don't trust nobody, grip the trigger. Nobody call up the gang and they come and get janked. Call me a river, give you a tissue. Bad and bullshit. Cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas is savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too. My bitch is bad and bullshit. Cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas is savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too.
Hold, fold, drop money out of space. Yeah, cut, introduce me to your bitch's wife, and we know she slutty. Broke a brick down, nutty, buddy, natty, nigga, touch you. Don't move too fast, I might shoot you. Draco, bad, bougie.
And then also what I want to say is that when you get to when you're doing the single wefts, whenever you get to the end of a row, you do want to cut that weft instead of folding it over, because folding it over will make the wig really bulky at the front of the wig, and we don't want that. So we just want to cut the weft whenever you start a new row.
Say if you a bad bitch, put your hands up high, hands up high. Hands up high, tell them dim the lights down right now. Put me in the mood. I'm talking about dark room perfume.
I recognize your fragrance. Hold up, you ain't never gotta say shit. And I know you taste this a little bit. High maintenance. Everybody else basic. You live life on an everyday basis with poetic justice. Poetic justice. If I told you that a flower bloomed in a dark room, would you?
And so when I get closer to the top of the wig, I like to use more T-pins to hold the weft in a more like precise location of the wig, just so I can sew it in just so it can be like evenly sewn onto the wig, and so that there's not more hair on one side versus the other side. I just like to use more T-pins to kind of anchor it more precisely in place, so that way there's no question about like where I'm sewing it or anything. Whereas at the bottom of the wig, you know, it didn't have to be super exact, but up here we want to be much more precise at the top of the wig, because that's the part of the wig that people don't see the most.
And I know just what you want.
And then you also saw me like cut the wig before I started sewing the weft on. And that's because like when you're doing the single tracks, you want to just be working with that portion. You don't want any extra track like hanging and leaving room for error. So just make sure you measure how much of the track you need and then pin that down and work with that.
Young East African girl, you too busy fucking with your other man. I was trying to put you on game, put you on a plane, take you and your mama to the motherland. I could do it.
Okay, so we're getting ready to start sewing on the last track. And so when you're sewing on the last track up against the closure, then you want to sew through the stitches that you made when you were sewing the closure on. And so I'll show a close-up of that. You see how the needle's going through the thread here? That's where you want to attach the weft to the closure. And that's just, again, to make sure that when you fold the hair on the closure over the weft, that the closure actually covers the weft and that there's no bulkiness or bumps or anything like that where the track is. And so, yeah, just make sure that when you sew the track up against the closure, that you're sewing through that stitch that you previously made for the closure and not like actually far up onto the closure. You want to sew the track right at the edge of the closure, or as close to the edge of the closure as you can get it.
You know, young rich niggas. You know, so we ain't really never had no old money. We got a whole lot of new money though. Raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking, the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Cooking up dope in the pot. We came from nothing to something, nigga. I don't trust nobody, grip the trigger, nobody. All of the gang and they come and get changed. From me a river, get you a tissue. Bad and bullshit. Cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas are savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too. My bitch is bad and bullshit. Cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas are savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too. All set. Records on records, got backers on backers, I'm running around in a group.
Okay, so I'm just kind of spraying the closure to just kind of brush it out of the way. But when you're taking the wig off, what I did here, sometimes when I'm sewing, I accidentally catch a little bit of the canvas in my like stitches that I make. And so when you take the wig off, the wig is kind of like attached to the canvas head. Like y'all can see right here, it's kind of attached. So if that happens, just go in with your scissors and cut the canvas part of that stitch and don't cut the actual thread of the stitches you made on the wig. Because if you cut the thread, then that's going to completely unravel that whole stitch. And we do not want that because we do not want this wig falling apart, honey. Okay, but right here, we're just cutting out the cap up under the closure, and just make sure that when you're doing that, you're very, very careful not to cut the stitches that you made in the wig, because that will cause the closure to completely unravel and detach from the wig, and you don't want that either. Because then you just gonna have to redo the whole wig, and that would suck. So yeah, just make sure to be as careful as you can to not cut the thread. Y'all see me adjusting and readjusting, looking closely to make sure I'm not cutting the thread that is attaching the closure to the wig.
Out of space, yeah, couldn't introduce me to your bitch's wife, and we know she slut me. Broke a brick down, nutty, buddy, natty, nigga, ducky. Don't move too fast, I might shoot you. Draco, bad, bougie.
Okay, so once I get finished cutting that cap out from up under the closure, I'm just kind of like styling the wig, just spraying water on it. I sprayed water on the closure just to brush the hairs up out of the way so I can separate the baby hairs. And then after I separate those baby hairs, I'm gonna go in and create that middle part that I know I want to wear with this wig, at least, you know, for the first part. And this is a free part closure, so you can part it however you want in the future, but for right now, I know I want to do a middle part, so that's what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna spray water, part the baby hairs out, create that middle part, and then later on y'all will see me like spray the hair with water and then add mousse to just kind of style it and form the curls and lay it as flat as possible. So I'll just let you guys watch me do that.
She wanna go and party. She wanna go and party. Nigga don't approach her with that authority. Nigga that ain't good game, homie, sorry. They say conversation, the nation, I can tell, but I could never right my wrongs unless I write it down for real. P.S. And I know just what you want. No way to justice, put it in the song. Alright. I really hope you play this, cause oh girl, you test my patience with all these seductive photographs and all these one-off vacations you've been taking. Clearly a lot for me to take in, it don't make sense. Young East African girl, you too busy fucking with your other man. I was trying to put you on game, put you on a plane, take you and your mama to the motherland. I could do it, maybe one day, when you figure out you're gonna need someone. When you figure out it's all right here in the city and you don't run from where we come from. That sound like poetic justice, poetic justice. You were so new to this life, but goddamn, you got adjusted. I mean, I write poems in these songs dedicated to the fun sex, your natural hair and your soft skin and your big ass and that sundress. Ooh, good God, what you doing that walk for? When I see that they move, I just wish we would fight less and we would talk more. They say communication, save relations, I can tell, but I can never right my wrongs unless I write them down for real.
Okay, so now, I know this is a different setting, but I changed locations, that's cool. So now we are about to sew on this elastic band, honey. This is the final stretch, y'all. So I'm putting the wig on because I put the wig on to measure how much of the elastic band that I need to cut. And so y'all see me right here putting the elastic band, like wrapping it around my head and actually like measuring where I will need to cut this elastic band. And so I think I'm gonna zoom in right here. Yeah, so y'all see me measuring it from one end to the other, and then I'm just kind of, you want to pull the elastic band as tight as you would like the wig to fit, and then cut based on that. Because if you don't pull the band to like make it tight, then the band's just gonna be really loose on your head when you put it on. So you want to pull the band tight, however tight you want it, when you're measuring it, and so that way when you cut it, it'll still be tight when you sew it onto the wig and put it on. So right here I'm just cutting it, and then when you're sewing the elastic band on, you want to sew on the thicker, more lighter colored part of the closure, like that's going around the edge of the closure. And at some point I think I zoom in to show y'all, but when you're sewing the elastic band on, you're using the same technique to sew that you were using with the wefts and the closure.
Bad and bullshit, cooking up dope with a Uzi. My niggas are savage, ruthless. We got 30s and 100 rounds too.
So when you sew it on, I think I zoom in here, but you see that lighter band part around the edge of the closure. You want to just make sure you're sewing the end of the elastic band to that part, and so that way when you put the wig on, it pulls the closure flat against your head. That's the main reason we want to sew like right there on the edge of the closure.
I swear these niggas is under me. The hate and the devil keep jumping me. They rose on me, keep me company. Hey, we did the most, yeah, pull up and go.
So when you get ready to sew the other end of the band on, just make sure it's going straight across and that the band isn't like flipped or in a weird position, and so it's comfortable when you actually put the wig on.
Then I send the bitch through Uber. I'm young and rich and plus I'm bougie. I'm not stupid, so I keep the Uzi. Records on records, got backers on backers, so my money making my bank. Ay. You niggas got a low act rate. We from the north, yeah, that way. Got cookie blunt in the ashtray.
And so once you sew the other end of that elastic band on, that basically completes the construction of this wig, girl. Now you got yourself a collision wig, honey. Hi everyone, this is Editing Me, and I'm realizing that I, as usual, completely forgot to record an outro for this video. So this is me recording the outro. Shout out to you if you watched all the way to the end. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share the video if it was helpful for you, or if you feel like it might be helpful for somebody else, and then hit the notification bell. And this was part 1 in a 2-part series of how I made and installed this wig. So this video was the make, and then part 2 is the install. So make sure y'all click the link in the description box, and then it'll also probably be in the end screen somewhere around here. But yeah, so again, shout out to you if you watched all the way through the end, and I will see you guys in the next video for the install. Bye.